Okay, hi everybody. Just give it a minute here while everybody gets connected, sound and video gets up and running. Hopefully everybody can hear me so far. Okay. All right, so I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Hooker, and I'll be the moderator for today's Eval Cafe. The Cafe is a longstanding speaker series that's hosted by the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The goal of the series is to encourage a deeper dive into all things evaluation. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy, recognizing that WMU is located on lands historically occupied by the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Today, we're excited to be joined by Min Ma. She is the founder and principal of MXM Research Group, a research and evaluation firm based in Boston. Most of her early evaluation work was in the international development space in Africa and Asia, but over the last few years, she's shifted her work to focus on local communities in Boston and New England. Min also serves as president of the Greater Boston Evaluation Network and co-leads a collaboration called SEEN that explores how applied research and evaluation can center equity and justice. She joins us today to share what it has taken her and her team to build shared practice in centering equity and justice in their work, and a card deck they developed as a tool to support this. We do have a large audience joining us today, so to ask a question, please use the Zoom reaction button to raise your hand, and then we'll just address questions as we go. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Min.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everyone. I'm going to get my presentation on the screen. Hopefully, is that the right one? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing Samantha nod. Okay, it's great to see you all, and I'm really excited to see some familiar faces. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to just having a conversation about what it looks like to center equity and justice in our work with data, and to share ideas about how we as evaluators can better build this into our practice. So Samantha gave a brief introduction, and I'll share a little bit more before I get started about myself and my team. My name is Min. I'm the founder and principal of MXM Research Group. We're a research and evaluation firm based in Greater Boston, and we work alongside change makers across the social sector to gather and use data thoughtfully. So we work with nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, other evaluation firms. A lot of our work is in Greater Boston, though some of it does also have national reach across the United States. And our work is really to support our partners to conduct evaluations. It's to gather community data. Sometimes we're asked to help map systems and make sense of them. Sometimes we're asked to help make improvements to data practices within an organization. And we work across a range of issues, from domestic violence to mental health to environment education and climate justice. So that's a little bit about us. The thing that I'm always most excited to share is that our tagline is data plus soul, and that's really a nod to the relationships behind the work we do as evaluators. So first and foremost, to the people that we are collecting data from and those that we feel very accountable to, they are most impacted by the work that we do, or they should be. Data plus soul for us is about how we are in relationship to our partners, our clients, so the people who are commissioning the work, whose questions we really want to help ask, and where we're really trying to show up as learning partners. And then finally, data plus soul for us is about relationships within our team, how we work together. And for me, as the leader of the firm, how I'm building infrastructure to really support that sort of collaboration I want to see happen in service of equity. And so each of these relationships will show up in our talk today. Great. So the starting premise for us today is going to be that data always comes from a perspective. Now, I've been out of school for a long time now, so I don't really know what's being taught in the classroom for research and evaluation, but there are a whole lot of us who are mid to late in our careers who are trained that research is to be conducted in ways that are objective and unbiased. And so for me, this showed up throughout my training in undergrad. where I studied cognitive neuroscience, and also in my grad training where I learned how to conduct randomized controlled trials. We were taught that we needed to be objective. And now as an evaluator, people approach MXM Research Group from time to time because they want an evaluation that offers an objective, unbiased perspective on the impact of a program. So what I want to highlight here is how dangerous that can be when you think about the various choices that need to be made when we're working with data. Thinking about what perspectives we're drawing on when we make a decision, like look at the trees, right? When we decide, are we going to look at the tree canopy or the root system? What section of the forest might we look at, and whether we're going to look at a small cluster of it or the whole thing. And so, yes, this is partly about methodology, but that's not the whole picture. What I want to tune us into is the different assumptions that we're making when we make these decisions. These are often going unstated, but within an evaluation, these assumptions are really guiding important questions like what aspect of a change effort we're going to measure, what questions we're going to ask, where the boundaries of an inquiry might lie, and how we define success. So I'm going to take us back to my own cognitive neuroscience roots, where we're learning about how humans perceive the world and what it actually takes for the human brain to process the massive amounts of information we're confronted with all of our senses from day to day, and what the brain does in response to that to be able to manage it all is that we rely on heuristics. These are the mental shortcuts that we're using to be able to arrive at a quick decision or to save mental effort. So we can't possibly weigh everything that comes at us carefully without those shortcuts. But that's where heuristics also lead to systematic errors and biases. And I'm sure many of you know, there's a long list of cognitive biases that show up in our daily lives and in our evaluation work. That's how marketers make money. So I'll give you two examples with the availability heuristic. We make decisions based on how available examples are in our mind, how easy it is to remember or imagine them. With confirmation bias, we tend to search for, notice, and interpret information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs. Oftentimes, we're not aware of these processes, and so you can imagine how different people's biases can lead to different decisions throughout an evaluation practice. And it's going to depend on our own positionality, the privileges that we have, and we're usually not aware of those privileges until we really think about it. Our own understanding of cultural context, of historical context, within a particular community. And these are all waters we swim in. We don't notice the water. But they really influence critical decisions that we're making as evaluators, and can have a really outsized impact on both how we go about the work we do, like the process of conducting an evaluation, and also the findings and the conclusions we're drawing. And there's a whole lot of literature and discourse about what the risk is in terms of potential harm to communities and mistrust, and how missing these can lead to inaccurate findings. And this is really well documented, especially in Indigenous and Black communities in the United States. So for us, Data plus Soul is about recognizing that data always comes from a perspective, and really it's on us to figure out how to do the work in ways that that give us pause points to think about what our blind spots are, what our biases are, and to connect that with action. What are we going to do about it? All right, so this talk is in part about a card deck. I'll share more about the card deck at the end, but you're going to start seeing some cards and the questions that are on there. These are ultimately, this is what the card deck looks like. For those of you who are in person, I sent a few for you to hold and sift through. But these are really cards that contain questions that our team has developed over time to prompt reflection and discussion. where we think it really matters, where we think it's really important to stop and ask. And so I'll read the questions out loud on this particular card. And then I'm going to invite, I'd love to hear any examples of when any of you have asked these questions during a project. So the card reads, what assets, interests, and gifts does your team bring to this work? What lenses, biases, and perspectives do you or team members bring? And what perspectives are missing? So I'll pause for a second. I know this is a really large group. I'd love to hear one or two examples from the audience. When was the last time you asked one of these questions on a project? And tell me about it. In what context? You know, did you ask it to yourself? Did you ask it as a group? What did you do about it? Or what conversation did it create?
And feel free to either come off mute or raise your hand.
Okay. I see someone in the Zoom audience with a raised hand. Yakuda.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'll put my video on so that people know I'm a human. So I love the question. I think with respect to, and thank you so much for your talk. I'm really happy to be here. With respect to what perspectives are we missing, I think this is such a key point, right? So I'm also in the impact measurement space. And one of the things that we do, even if it's not part of a deliverable to the client or the partner, we work mainly with private sector companies, is we do a stakeholder analysis, right? To kind of understand who are the various stakeholders, are we missing somebody? And then ensure that those stakeholders, especially the primary stakeholders and some of the secondary stakeholders, are included in that literature review and that initial qualitative research that we're doing to kind of then identify, okay, what are the key indicators, and then, you know, build out the survey tool, etc. So I'll pause there. I think what perspectives are missing is really critical, and we're hoping to bridge that gap by doing a stakeholder analysis and really working with the company to say, all right, maybe your customer is your key target, but what is there a group even within the customer's, say, household? Is there something that we need to think about, like, or amongst the employees that we need to think about? Thank you.
Thanks so much for that example. I love that. Can I hear one more?
And this is, we're in the Eval Café room and we have one or two people in here who'd like to share.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Charlie. I'm a student evaluator, just got hired by Western Michigan University. And I guess we're working a lot with like local communities and stuff right now, especially like entrepreneurs that we're starting to. And I think like in terms of what perspectives our team brings to the table, I think we're pretty fortunate to have people from a wide range of perspectives. We have people from different countries abroad. I think we have people of a variety of like ethnic backgrounds, financial backgrounds. And I think we work really well together as a team, at least so far. But I think sort of alluding to the last person that spoke, I think perspectives that we're missing are people like business owners and people that have experience doing this type of work as like entrepreneurs, because you know, I don't personally at least have a lot of experience with that. And I found it difficult to like find the tools necessary to help those people.
Great, thanks for that example. Was there another one in the room? I can't see it very well.
Yeah, so it's an example and the same time a question. So likely the card I picked is on communication and dissemination. So recently I embarked on a qualitative study, and with the help of a faculty member, we got IRB approval from Western. And so we're trying to publish the paper. And the journal, whilst I was going through the process of publication, the journal required that, I make my data public, right? That was a requirement of it because an open access kind of journal. And then I was like, ooh, IRB says that I can make my data, I can share, no third parties have access to data. after everything. So I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to do, but I think I told them that this is what IRB says, and then they said, okay, fine. And then I'm waiting for the final review so that if the paper gets published or something. So dissemination, communication is really important, I believe, in any study, in evaluative practice or whatever it is. Right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I agree. Yeah, and we'll definitely, I think we'll get there in this talk. A lot of our content is focused on earlier on and even the design and decision-making phase. Becky, it's so nice to see you. I saw you had a hand up. We'll make this the last comment, for example.
Thanks, Min. So I think we bought a couple sets of these cards on our team and really have had some fun playing with them. And I think what's important about this card, and you've actually brought this question to us at other times too, was of course about the perspectives that we're missing, but it also I think inspired a lot of introspection for us about what was inside, what perspectives we may be sometimes blind to, which can change over time with our experiences as evaluators, or as program staff in some cases. And it feels hard to know what's missing, or those two things really go hand in hand. And I think this question is a lovely way to kind of help us think together about, what is coming alongside of each of us and our team whenever we're together trying to do work. So it's really a great question.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'll just share that Becky and I have worked together on a project where really some of these conversations have led us to say, oh my goodness, we need to work more with teens on this, but how can we do so in an ethical way? And we really came up with challenges there too. But yeah, so they're like definitely raised a lot of conversation for us. And thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, so I will do a little bit of a deep dive into I'm trying to organize my screen so I can see all my notes. I'll share a little bit of a deep dive on how we've incorporated this set of questions into a particular project. Because like for me, the cards, the questions, like it's all about the how. So MXM Research Group works with a few local communities in Massachusetts to administer the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So this is a tool that's developed by the CDC. We do this every 2 years. It's a really long survey. It asks hard questions of teens about their use of substances, their mental health, dating, violence, sexual activity. It's super intrusive. We help manage the administration, we lead the data analysis, and often we're helping our partners present findings to community agencies, school districts, residents, folks who are invested in supporting teens and want to know what's happening. So I'm going to walk through how, well, I would say that some of these partnerships started when I was a solo practitioner, and though now I'm in the process of growing a team. And so I want to share a little bit about what this reflection has looked like when I'm answering these questions myself, but then also consider what it looks like when you bring in other team members to be a part of that conversation. So for me, with this particular survey in one particular community, what do I know a lot about? That first question, the community has a lot of first and second generation immigrants. I'm not an immigrant myself, but my parents were, so I know what it's like to have to navigate the school system as a teenager and community resources without the help of parents. I had to translate a lot of things for them and filter their experience of my education. I know that a lot of immigrant communities don't know zip codes, or they don't think of them the way we as researchers might. And so when I choose to use the word community in data collection and analysis, I need to be really explicit about what I mean. Thirdly, I know a lot about teenage depression and substance use. This comes from both personal and professional experience, and this is really going to influence the way I frame survey questions. The next set of questions, what biases do I have? Several people who are close to me grew up in this particular community. They're people of color, and they're pretty critical of the school district in the ways in which it did or did not set them up for success. So that could be a bias. I also know several young people from this community who've died of overdose. And so, you know, as I'm asking this question, I'll wonder, is it going to influence what data I pay close attention to or how I choose to disaggregate it? And so in this case, availability and confirmation biases may be at play when I sit down to focus my analysis. And this could really benefit the work. It could also really derail it. But that's where my own perspective comes into play. Where are my blind spots? I know that gender identity and sexual orientation language around these are evolving quickly within this community, especially among teens. I also know there's a lot of race and ethnic diversity in the community. And so I know I'm going to want teens to review the way I'm framing the response options to make sure they see themselves in them. But also I know I'm going to have to make hard decisions about how to aggregate results because the school is going to want to see be able to compare to, you know, state categories, and, you know, there's a lot of negotiation there. So I know I'm going to be looking for additional perspectives from teens, community agencies, school staff, and I think you get it with the example. Like, you can see how each of these raises new questions that have implications on how the project is designed and carried out. Okay, but also how by asking these questions, my work will be better off because it's going to yield more relevant and accurate results that are more likely to be used. I'm going to pause a moment because at the bottom of our cards, we list a set of principles that kind of guide our team's work in Data Plus Soul, and also guide the questions that are in the deck. And so I'm just going to pause for a second and call out two of them, the two of them that show up on this deck. So one principle that we as a team bring to the work is multiple truths. We acknowledge that people have, these are like written, this is what's written on some of the intro cards that we have. We acknowledge that different people have different understandings of root causes of problems, and that multiple truths open up possibilities for moving forward. The other one that shows up here is humans over data. And so for our team, it's really important to prioritize our shared humanity and relationships with the communities and the collaborators and ourselves over checking boxes like we did it because we said we would in our scope of work. So this will come up a few times as we talk. Okay, so that was really I started at individual practice because I really think that's critical for where we begin. And so now what I'm going to do is to share a little bit about how this affects team practice and what other questions we might ask to really support this, and kind of how that ripples out. So this next question, and I show the back of the card. So in the scoping and design phase, you might ask, how are you defining expertise and who holds this? And I heard some of this in the examples that were given by those of you who shared. For us, thinking about how our work with this community example with the teen survey I shared, now that multiple members of the MXM Research Group team are working on this project, the answer to the questions around expertise and biases and like what we know and what we don't know, like that's all changed significantly with each individual person we're asking, we're bringing onto the team. And so how much richer it's the breadth of perspectives that we have to draw on as a team, and maybe we have fewer blind spots. And that's definitely one of the reasons I decided to grow my practice and not practice solo all the time. It's like really recognizing what a gift that is and how limited my own perspective can be. But then this really raises the question of who. So whose perspectives are included and when? Do I have the right team in place to work on a particular project? And in another example, I'm not going to share the full thing, but I mentioned earlier that some of the work we do is to support projects that support children and families who've experienced domestic violence. And so if I decide that it's going to be really important for me to hire team members or bring on team members who have deep knowledge of domestic violence, whether that's personal or professional or from somewhere else, then I have to consider what team practices do I need to have in place? What expectations and guidelines and group agreements do we need to have as a team to be able to do that work together thoughtfully, especially when trauma could be involved. And so for me, this set of cards can be about, team leaders, especially, people who are designing the project and responsible for facilitating how the team moves through it. Team leaders need to consider how they're going to facilitate and manage those group dynamics, where and when they're going to invite team members to contribute their lens and perspectives. So it's like going beyond, diversity, but also what does that mean to really leverage that and honor multiple truths and perspectives. Team power dynamics are going to be really relevant here. Yeah, I would say this how will I invite team contributions is a part of that. So I'll pause and offer this this other card, which gives an example of a way you might have this conversation as a team. This is something that we love doing. We do it all the time when we launch a project. The card says, try this, draw or map out the system in which the project is situated. What individuals and institutions are involved? How do they affect one another? And are there opportunities to shift power and decision making? And so for me, for us, this card has been really useful. Sometimes we'll do it on our own and then share results. And that's one way to kind of invite everyone on a team to, do that reflection, but also share the pieces that they think are really going to be relevant and like what their contribution could be to decisions made in an evaluation project. Sometimes I think the harder thing to do is to draw this together in conversation. But again, that's another way in which you could facilitate that sort of conversation within a team. And really it's hard to do and it takes time, right? Ultimately, as team leaders, those of us who are in that position, it's on us to create the space and the relationships within the group for these conversations to happen and for people to really contribute their perspectives. For that second question, how and when can I speak up? If you're not a key decision maker on a team, but you see something that the team leader doesn't see, how and when will you speak up about that? And this really goes back to how Data Plus Soul is about relationships and how will we move through this work, especially if racial trauma or other types of trauma show up for team members. Okay, so now I'm gonna zoom out another level and think about partner relationships. And some of you alluded to this as well in thinking about, communications, stakeholder analysis, but there are going to be real implications of this on scope, budget. Managing team dynamics takes time. Is that time accounted for in our scope of work? And who pays for that time? This is something I sit with a lot because these conversations aren't always billable. And we don't want to say, no, that's not enough money to do this work. It's a balance that we always have to strike when we're developing a relationship. So I think back to my previous work in the international development space. I don't know if it's still like this, but straight up an RFP or request for proposals would say, we expect you to do this work in 20 days. And so I'm often reflecting on, how much extra time is it going to take for my team to work through, the processes I just described. Do we skip it if it's not covered? Is that even an option for us? Like, you can't really unsee some of these questions once you start asking them. So this card that I have up here, I'll read it out loud. we put it in the analysis and interpretation phase, but really you could ask it in a lot of different moments. Are you creating space and time in the analysis for unexpected findings? And how are you balancing new unexpected findings that require exploration with project deadlines and budgets? I think that's a really important one to consider. What trade-offs are you making on where you decide to pay attention and spend your time? And ultimately, this second question I put up here, who are we accountable to? For me is a part of that equation. If we're accountable to the communities most affected by the data, then we might spend our time differently, potentially, if the client that's hiring us has a different set of evaluation questions or priorities. Yeah, so Data Plus Soul is about being in service of relationship, both with our partners and clients, and also with people and communities affected by the work. Okay, so that's a lot. Key takeaway I want to leave you with is we are each responsible for starting this work. The more we ask these questions of ourselves, no matter what our role is in an evaluation project, the more likely it's going to come up in the work. Because like I said, you can't really unsee the questions. And it's on us to break out of our own autopilots and heuristics to be able to build that muscle. And ultimately, this is going to ripple out and influence your evaluation work, who you choose to work with, and how you choose to work together. My dream is to see questions like these influence the broader evaluation ecosystem and just how business is done. There are a lot of aspects of the way business is done that don't serve these questions. And what I want to see is evaluation being more responsive to context and power. And ultimately, it's a question of rigor and the quality of the work we're able to deliver. So we're looking at a head of Romanesco broccoli, because for those of you who do know me, I'm heavily influenced by Adrienne Marie Brown, who writes about fractals. And so fractals are never-ending patterns that are repeated over and over again at larger scales, found throughout nature, like with this head of Romanesco. It's composed of a series of self-similar smaller buds that continues at smaller levels. And so we, as individuals, are at that smallest level. It's our job to do the work. It's our job to ask the questions. It's our job to figure out how to bring it in to the conversations that are going to matter. So I'll leave you with this quote. Adrienne Marie Brown says, "What we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system." And that's really what drove my team's work in building out a deck. Okay, so I feel like I need to just name that the deck for us, like we built it because this used to be a database, honestly. Like we would read these really amazing resources like this child trends paper, decolonizing methodologies, equitable evaluation framework. I attended the We All Count training. And so each of these created a set of questions or activities that I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to remember to ask this. When am I going to ask it? When in what phase of work am I going to ask this question? And it just became this really long, delightful database that I couldn't really manage. And that's one of the reasons why I had the idea of developing it into a deck, because you could imagine like each of those cards could take a really long time to answer, and they deserve that level of thought. So for me, it wasn't about, having a checklist of questions. That's partly why when we're asked if there's a PDF of the deck, the answer is no right now, because it makes a difference when you're holding one question in front of you and engaging with it, like really taking the time to engage with it. But that's why we built the deck. It's one tool, but really like anyone can build their own set of questions. You can build your own database. And I really encourage you to think about ways to kind of to build that into your practice. Our team does every other week. We have a reflective practice. It's time set aside to be able to pause and think about equity and think about these questions. Sometimes our project leads will build it into, certain milestones of the project and say, okay, like once we finish with the data collection, before we start analysis, we're going to pull some cards and have a conversation. And that's what our team meeting is going to be about. So that's some of the ways we've used it. We've heard, one of my favorite examples, I heard someone who does have the deck, they said they'll just sit down with a team member once a week and pull a deck and just talk about whatever comes up for them in the work that they're doing together. And like, that makes my heart sing. That's what I want to hear. And the last thing I'll say is that, yeah, the cards themselves in our deck are arranged by phase of, you know, a typical research project. That's how my database looked too. That's how I sorted it. And so that's part of the reason why we do it that way. Okay, so I can't believe I actually made it on time, but I believe this is now time for questions and answers. I haven't actually read through what's in the chat, so I'm going to take a moment to do that, but I love to have a conversation and hear what questions are coming up for you. What can I clarify?
Thank you, Min. And I know you said you haven't checked out the chat yet, but there is a question from in the room that's in the chat. If I can read that to you, we could start with that, and
Okay.
then feel free to enter more in the chat or raise your hand. So the question is, can you give an example of how discussing a question in your deck influenced how you carried out an evaluation or who was included in the process?
Yeah, so the few that I'll name that I alluded to, you know, during the talk, both actually in the youth risk behavior survey example I gave, and also in the work that I did with Becky and her team, it became really clear that we needed to chat with youth and get their perspectives. And we, in thinking about different aspects of the evaluation work, realized, okay, we have this list of questions, and like, here are the ones that are going to be the most important for us to bring to teens to get their perspective. And we're not going to be able to be responsive to them and their priorities if we don't ask those questions. And so I have a few examples of where the decision was made then to, you know, come up with a youth advisory board, figure out how to convene them, how to hold that space, how to create trust, how many times are we going to meet with them, who's going to lead it, is it us, is it someone from the community or the school that they know, what's that going to look like? And again, just because I'm seeing, yeah, I can stop sharing my screen, just because I'm seeing some, a note about the business question. Yeah, like there's a huge business question there, right? Like if we didn't scope it out and include that in the project, and it's a slim scope, like we have to decide, are we going to take the time to do that or not? And what are the trade-offs? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, we have another question in the About Cafe room. Go ahead.
Right, thank you. So I'm kind of interested in all the stages of the evaluation practice. I'm kind of interested in the data, making meaning out of the data. So i.e. interpreting, the data. So the question is, how can our perspective kind of bias the raw data we have? I know that prior to collecting the data, our perspective can influence it. But now we have the raw data. How can our perspective kind of bias the data we have, the raw data we have? So when you talk of perspective, maybe you can narrow it down to me, because perspectives are broad, you know, so that's my question.
Okay, I'll attempt to answer. You can tell me if this is what you're asking. How can our perspectives influence, I see Mike put in the chat, that's where I wanted to go first, like our perspectives will influence what questions we even ask. And so if I think about my 100-item survey for my 100-item youth risk behavior survey, and I know I want teens to be able to answer it, you know, work through it in 15 minutes, I'm gonna have to prioritize which questions even end up on the survey and how they're asked. And if I choose to I want to say back when I started working on this years ago, we were still just asking about gender binary. And now there's this really long list of options that we offer because we want teens to see themselves in the data. And how we choose to ask those questions are going to influence what the ways that we can disaggregate the data and elevate certain perspectives. And we've learned a lot that LGBTQ teens in this particular community especially struggle with mental health challenges. And we might not have known that in the nuanced ways we need to if we hadn't thought to ask. So that's one way that perspectives in the room, even during, survey design, might influence the results and how they're analyzed. I hope that answers the question. I think I see Candia, you have a hand up?
Yes, thank you so much for this talk. It's really fascinating to hear your thinking on this. I was the one who put the comment in the chat about business, and I have a broader question than just about the card deck or these questions, but it's clear that you've thought really intentionally about your business, from your tagline to how you select your team members. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that whole process looked like for you. Did you start with selecting the qualities that you want your business to reflect, and then that led into the choice of the tagline and the priorities that are showing up in your cards? And like, how, if you were to start from scratch, what's the process to make your business reflective of these priorities?
Ooh, that's really juicy. I feel like that could be a whole separate talk. It was really iterative. Some of it was really reactionary, like, oh my gosh, I need at least one other person working alongside me. Here are the skills I know I'm missing, or here, like my first hire, I hired her because of particular skills that I knew she had that I wanted to learn from, and that I knew were going to really make an important difference in the way we conducted our work. Data Plus Soul didn't come to us until probably a year into me being more than just myself. So like having a team, and then I think part of, bringing people on in a permanent way really influences how you articulate, like, here's how we do the work and why. And I never really had to articulate that to myself because, again, that's just how I work, how I choose to do my own professional development, spend that time. I didn't have to justify it to another person or to say, all right, you got to scale up here because this is how we do things and this is how we deliver our projects. So that's a little bit of a start. The next hand I saw up was Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting this. This is my first webinar here, but it's great. So your comments about the survey resonated with me, especially because we're running the youth tobacco survey here out of University of Illinois for the first time this year. But aside from that, I just wanted to comment on and maybe seek a little bit of feedback on. I feel like on our team we have a pretty good handle on like asking these questions to ourselves and knowing who we want at the table and reflecting on that, but then actually getting those people to the table and getting their feedback can be another story. Especially, we're in health evaluation, and oftentimes the groups or the people who we want to understand and have feedback from are really underrepresented. Their lives are pretty complicated. They often are low income, et cetera, et cetera. So their time is, they don't necessarily have the luxury to come sit with us or talk to us and all those things. And then we've gone down the road of incentivizing them, through payments, gift cards, et cetera. But then we're sitting in a university setting. We do have the IRB. Then sometimes it's, well, you're not incentivizing the other people who are, all those issues. So I think in evaluation and in research, you run into those roadblocks. once you get past that step of, you know, all of your wonderful points about asking the questions and even thinking about whose perspectives you want at the table. So just wondering if people have experiences or thoughts in that area.
Anyone want to jump in there? You can just unmute if you do want to jump in, because I know some others have their hands raised with questions.
I'm not
Jane?
sure if this is relevant, but in terms of like engaging the populations that like we're serving, I've always gone to like meetings within the community, like HOA meetings or churches, right? I go to a lot of churches. And that typically reaches some of the populations, especially those low income populations that we're trying to serve in an environment in which they're already taking the time out of work to go.
It's such a great point. That's really gives me some great ideas. I don't think we've fully gone down that road. Yeah.
Like community centers and like the Boys and Girls Club parent nights and
That's great. Thank you.
I'll add that, and that's why diversity matters on a team, and that's like that's a longer game,
Yeah.
issue to thread, but also like for us, sometimes it's like, are we the right ones to be in this space then? Like, is there a better partner for you to answer those questions? Or it's important for us to say, actually, like, here are the perspectives we aren't able to offer. Can you as the partner offer that, or those connections? Like we can't do this project unless you bring in some of those community connections, and state that up front, right? Like we can't be everything to everyone. And like we're currently a team of 6, like there's only so much ground we can cover, and all the populations we're talking about aren't monoliths.
Right.
Yeah. I can't represent Asian American perspectives, but I can share a little bit with my team about what they should be thinking about. So yeah, that would be my response. I'm gonna recognize we have about 7 minutes left. Ais, I hope I'm saying your name.
It's Aize.
Aize.
Lovely to thank you so much for your presentation. I was really struck in particular by the section on team practice, because I currently work for a pretty small research and evaluation startup. We don't really have any standards or framing for team practice at the start of a project in particular. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on the steps you take to ground your team at the start of an evaluation, so I can like go back and make a case for this with my boss. Because I just sounded lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, literally, it's like the questions on those cards, like if you just, you'll get the slides, right? You have those questions, even if it's to say, well, okay, here's the hard part, because everyone wants to start work planning right away. Like, okay, we got the contract, we're gonna do this, this, and this. Here are all the things we have to do. We have to decide on methods. So it's gonna take a sec. And I mean like set an 1.5-hour meeting where really you're just there to answer those questions. And so we do a lot of, we like to do arts-based work. There are activities, in evaluation literature, like there are identity wheels that you can kind of use to reflect on your own positionality. We like to do rich picture diagramming. And if you looked up that phrase, there's a lot of guidance on how to facilitate rich picture diagramming, and just find one of those facilitation tools, or just sit down and ask the questions and say, okay, like, I think it's important that somebody does hold that, like, okay, what is the space? What are the expectations? Are we required to bring in personal experience or not? And how are, like, what will the ground rules be for the ways our team engages and show up? It's up to each individual how they want to show up in that work and what they want to offer at any given time. And so, yeah, those are some tips. Do I have anything written anywhere? Like, I feel like I have a collection of resources I tend to draw on. You're welcome to message me to ask for links. And I see some responses in the chat as well. Jody, you've been really patient.
I just have a quick question, I hope. What other professional development resources do you know of? Like, are there conferences that we can attend that talk on this topic? Are there webinars or specific books that we should be reading?
On the how or on the what? Or both?
Both.
I would say the reason I offered some of the books and papers that have influenced us is that you know, those like Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's book on decolonizing methodologies talks about what a different kind of research agenda might look like that's Indigenous led, right? And so I would say what's on there are some of like the main places that I tend to go or that my team tends to go to think about like what is equity to us, what aspects of equity are important to us, and how does that show up in the work? Are there conferences? I don't know, folks, help me out here. I'm not really sure. I guess I'll tease that our team is thinking about what's our role beyond this card deck in creating spaces for this conversation. And if things go according to plan, we might be creating some spaces for researchers and practitioners to come and ask questions together and think about and have some accountability around like how do we do this in our practice. So we're actively thinking about creating a solution for that, but I don't have anything to announce right now. But yeah, Jody, I'll write your name down and reach out if I think of any other examples.
If you need a planning committee, I will volunteer myself to sit on a committee.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat it could be that you find spaces with local affiliates or the TIGs, the topical interest groups at AEA that give you an opportunity to ask these questions. Okay, I think the last one I'll take is actually, sorry, in the room. Yeah, I've been neglecting the room.
You're good. You're good. It's
Oh, sorry. I have a question about, well, I'm an undergrad student right now, and I'm interested in going into international development, possibly international development evaluation. But I'm just sort of like trying to figure out what my next step should be in terms of like places I could work or opportunities I could do, or if I should go get my master's, or places I maybe I'm aiming for, in the international development community that you might recommend.
Yeah, I imagine that through Eval Youth, which is an international community of young people and practitioners interested in evaluation, I think that might be a place to look. For opportunities, I used to spend a lot of time on Relief Web, which is a mix of international development and humanitarian opportunities. So you might poke around there and see what people are talking about, what types of jobs or RFPs are being posted. That might be a nice way to connect. So those are a few off the top of my head.
Okay, and unfortunately, we are out of time, but Min, we did have a couple of questions. A couple of people have already purchased the card deck, but if they want to go and find out more or purchase it, it's dataplussoul.com, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect. And I did put in the chat, you can join our Eval Cafe mailing list or view and register for our upcoming presentations. I appreciate your presentation, Min. It was really interesting. And I want to thank all of you for joining us and participating in all of your great questions. I'm hoping that you'll join us for our next presentation. That's going to be on February 14th, featuring Thomas Archibald. He's the Executive Director of the Center for International Research, Education, and Development at Virginia Tech. And his presentation is titled Practical Wisdom for Evaluators. So hopefully we'll see some familiar faces next month.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I'd love to stay connected. Find me on LinkedIn or social media. Find a way to get my email address. And yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. Thanks for your time.